The Nexus Arena floated in the heart of the Meridian system, a colossal structure that dwarfed even the largest battleships. Its transparent walls offered a breathtaking view of 3 different suns, their light painting the arena in shifting hues of gold and crimson. Today, those same walls reflected the faces of billions watching from across the galaxy, a mosaic of species united only by their shared curiosity and buried prejudices. Commander Elias Rain sat in the veteran section, his weathered hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The ceremonial uniform felt foreign after years of civilian clothes, the fabric too crisp, the metals too heavy. Around him, fellow veterans from a dozen different worlds maintained careful distances, their own histories written in scars and 1,000-yard stares. The Unity trials had always been theater, but this year felt different. The tension was palpable, like the moments before a storm. In the center of the arena, a small figure stood alone on the gleaming platform. The Velari boy couldn't be more than 10 years old, his iridescent blue skin pale with fear. The ceremonial robes of his people hung loose on his slight frame, making him appear even smaller against the vastness of the space. His large amber eyes darted nervously between the crowd and the hovering cameras that circled him like mechanical vultures. "Poor kid," muttered the Centaurian veteran beside Rain. "They should have sent someone older, someone who could handle the pressure." Rain said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He recognized that look, the same terror he'd seen in young soldiers' eyes during the war, the same helplessness that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. The arena's announcer, a melodious lyran with flowing tentacles, began the traditional opening ceremony. Her voice echoed through the vast space, translated simultaneously into hundreds of languages. "Today, we gather not as enemies, but as neighbors in this great cosmic home." The Unity trials remind us that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding. Pretty words, Rain thought bitterly. He'd heard similar speeches before every major offensive. Understanding didn't stop plasma rounds or shield the dying. But he'd come anyway, drawn by something he couldn't name perhaps. The same force that had made him volunteer for one more mission when he should have stayed home. The boy's hands trembled as he lifted the ceremonial piece, offering a crystalline sculpture representing his world's greatest treasure. The crowd leaned forward, millions of beings holding their breath. This was the moment they'd all come to see. Would the representative of Earth accept the gesture, or would old wounds prove too deep? That's when the arena's security chief made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unexpected participant. Commander Elias Rain of the Earth Coalition has requested to represent humanity in today's ceremony." The silence that followed was deafening. Rain rose slowly, his artificial leg clicking against the metal floor. Every eye in the arena fixed on him as he began the long walk to the center platform. Behind him, he could hear the frantic whispers of officials and the sharp intake of breath from the crowd. The journey to the center platform felt like walking through a minefield. Each step echoed in the unnatural silence, amplified by the arena's acoustics until it sounded like gunfire. Rain's artificial leg, a souvenir from the Battle of Kepler's Ridge, protested with each movement, but he maintained his steady pace. Around him, the crowd's shock was giving way to nervous energy. Some spectators were already reaching for their communicators, no doubt alerting news networks across the galaxy. In the VIP section, Ambassador Helena Voss of the Earth Coalition was frantically trying to reach her security detail. Her perfectly composed diplomatic mask had cracked, revealing the panic beneath. "Stop him," she hissed into her comm unit. "This wasn't approved. This could destroy everything we've worked for." But it was too late. Rain was already halfway to the platform, and the galaxy was watching. The Velari boy's Zephyr, according to the program, stood frozen as the human veteran approached. His species had evolved on a world where stillness meant survival, where movement attracted predators. Now, faced with the most famous human soldier of the war, every instinct screamed at him to remain motionless. Rain remembered the first time he'd seen a Velari warrior up close. It was during the siege of Novo Tirana, when his unit had been pinned down by enemy fire. The alien had appeared like a ghost, moving with impossible grace through the smoke and chaos. For a moment, their eyes had met across the battlefield, too. Soldiers recognizing each other across the divide of species and circumstance. Then the moment passed, and they were enemies again. The boy before him now looked nothing like those warriors. Where they had been tall and imposing, he was small and fragile. Where they had moved with deadly precision, he trembled with fear. But those eyes, those same amber eyes, held the same intelligence, the same spark of life that Rain had learned to respect even in his enemies. "Commander Rain," the arena announcer said, her voice carefully neutral despite the chaos erupting. In the control booth. "This is ... unexpected. Are you here in an official capacity?" Rain stopped at the edge of the platform, close enough to see the fine details of the boy's ceremonial robes. The fabric was woven with threads that seemed to capture and reflect light, creating patterns that shifted like living things. It was beautiful, he realized, like so many things about the Velari culture that the war had prevented him from appreciating. "No," he said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. "I'm here as myself, as someone who's seen enough war to know its price." The boy's grip on the crystal sculpture tightened. Up close, Rain could see that it wasn't just decorative. It was a memory crystal, containing the recorded experiences of Velari children who had lost their homes during the war. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was a child carrying the pain of other children, offering it to the very species that had caused a dot in the crowd. Reactions were polarized. The Velari delegation sat in stunned silence, uncertain whether this was a trap or a genuine gesture. The human section was equally divided, some rising to their feet in support, others shaking their heads in dismay. The media representatives were in a feeding frenzy, their cameras capturing every nuance of the encounter, but Rain's attention was focused entirely on the boy. He could see the child's internal struggle, the duty to his people warring with his natural fear. It was a burden no child should have to bear, human or otherwise. "What's your name, son?" Rain asked quietly. The boy's voice was barely above. A whisper. "Zephyr. Zephyr of the Twilight Cliffs." "That's a good name, strong." Rain took another step forward, and the boy didn't retreat. "I knew your cliffs once. Beautiful place. I hope to see them again someday, in better times." The arena held its breath as Rain slowly lowered himself to one knee. The simple action sent ripples of shock through the crowd. A human war hero kneeling before a child of his former enemies. The symbolism was impossible to miss, and the political implications were staggering. In the diplomatic section, emergency consultations were already underway. The Terran ambassador was fielding urgent calls from Earth, while her Velari counterpart tried to determine if this was an elaborate psychological warfare. Neither government had authorized this moment, and both were scrambling to control the narrative. But on the platform, politics seemed irrelevant. There was only an old soldier and a frightened child, separated by years of hatred and united by a moment of unexpected humanity. "You don't have to be afraid," Rain said softly, his words meant for the boy, but heard by billions. "I'm not here to hurt you." Zephyr's amber eyes searched the human's face, looking for deception. His people were natural empaths, able to sense the emotional resonance of other beings. What he felt from the scarred veteran wasn't anger or malice, but something he didn't expect: regret. Deep, bone-aching regret. My grandmother remembers you, Zephyr said suddenly. She was at the Battle of Kepler's Ridge. She said you could have killed her squad when they surrendered, but you didn't. You gave them water instead. The memory hit Rain like a physical blow. Kepler's Ridge, where he'd lost his leg and half his unit. Where he'd seen young Velari soldiers, barely older than the boy before him, dying in the mud. He'd spent 15 years trying to forget that day, but now it came flooding back with crystal clarity. I remember, he said, his voice rough with emotion. They were just kids, like you. The boy's grip on the memory crystal loosened slightly. She said you cried when you saw them die. She said she didn't know humans could cry for enemies. Around them, the arena remained silent, but the silence had changed. Where before it had been shocked and uncertain, now it was expectant. The crowd could sense that something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand what. Rain reached into his uniform and withdrew something that made the security teams tense, a small, metallic object that caught the light. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a medal, the highest honor the Earth Coalition could bestow on a soldier. The Medal of Valor, earned through blood and sacrifice on a dozen different worlds. This is for them, he said, holding it out to the boy. For all the young ones who died because old ones couldn't find another way. Zephyr stared at the medal, understanding its significance, even if he'd never seen one before. The emotional resonance was overwhelming: grief, honor, loss, and hope all tangled together in a way that made his empathic abilities sing with pain. And beauty. I can't take this, he whispered. I'm not a soldier. No, Rain agreed. You're something better. You're hope. The boy's hand shook as he reached out, not for the medal, but for the human's outstretched hand. The moment their fingers touched, something electric passed between them, not just the physical contact, but a recognition that transcended species. The crowd gasped as the image was broadcast across the galaxy, a human veteran and a Velari. Child, hands clasped in the center of the arena dot, but even as the moment unfolded, darker forces were already moving. In the shadows of the arena, communication channels buzzed with coded messages. The Purist Coalition, a radical faction that had never accepted the peace treaty, saw opportunity in the chaos. On Earth, the military hardliners who had opposed the armistice from the beginning were mobilizing their supporters. The moment of connection between Rain and Zephyr was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. It represented everything the extremists on both sides feared, the possibility that their former enemies might not be monsters after all. And that possibility threatened the very foundations of their power dot as the two figures stood together in the center of the arena. Neither could see the storm clouds gathering around them. They had touched something profound, something that could change the galaxy forever. But first, they would have to survive the consequences of their courage. The aftermath of the ceremony was chaos disguised as celebration, while the official response praised the spontaneous display of interspecies cooperation. Behind closed doors, governments on both sides were in crisis mode. The Unity trials had been carefully choreographed political theater, not a venue for genuine emotion. Rain and Zephyr had shattered the script, and the galaxy was struggling to improvise a new one. Rain found himself in a secure conference room aboard the diplomatic vessel Concordia, facing a tribunal of stern-faced officials. Ambassador Voss paced behind them, her diplomatic composure finally cracking completely. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded. The Purist Coalition is calling for your arrest. They're claiming this was a planned provocation, a way to make humanity look weak. The president is fielding calls from 12 different governors demanding your court-martial. Good, Rain said calmly. Maybe it's time someone provoked them. This isn't a joke, Commander. The peace treaty is hanging by a thread. There are factions on both sides who would love an excuse to restart the war, and you may have just given them one. General Morrison, Rain's former commanding officer, leaned forward. Elias, I've known you for 20 years. You're not a reckless man. What were you thinking? Rain met his old friend's eyes. I was thinking about a scared kid who didn't deserve to carry the weight of our failures. I was thinking about all the young soldiers, human and Velari, who died because we couldn't find a better way to solve our problems. And now that kid is in protective custody because of death threats, Morrison shot back. The Velari government is considering withdrawing from the treaty negotiations entirely. How does that help anyone? Meanwhile, on the Velari homeworld of Nixara, similar conversations were taking place. The Twilight Council had convened an emergency session, their crystalline chambers humming with agitated voices. Elder Siren, the most vocal opponent of the peace process, stood before the assembled council members. This human's gesture was not spontaneous, she declared, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked her as a truth speaker. It was calculated manipulation, designed to make us lower our guard. The boy was used as a pawn in their psychological warfare. But others disagreed. Elder Keth, ancient even by Velari standards, rose slowly to respond. I have lived through 3 wars with the humans. I have seen their capacity for both cruelty and compassion. What I witnessed today was not manipulation. It was recognition. The veteran saw in young Zephyr what I have seen in all our children, innocence that deserves protection. The debate raged for hours, but it was interrupted by an urgent message. From the diplomatic corps, the purist coalition had made their move. The attack came without warning. A coordinated series of bombings struck Unity Festival sites across 5 different worlds, killing dozens and injuring hundreds. The perpetrators left clear evidence of their identity: purist coalition calling cards bearing the slogan, "Purity through Strength." But the evidence was almost too convenient, too obvious. It's a false flag operation, Rain told the emergency council session via secure hologram. The real purists are fanatics, but they're not stupid. They wouldn't leave their signature on something like this. Then who? Ambassador Voss demanded. Someone who benefits from chaos. Someone who wants the peace process to fail, but doesn't want to take the blame for it. The answer came from an unexpected source. Zephyr, still in protective custody but monitoring the Galactic news feeds, had noticed something the adults missed. The boy's empathic abilities, enhanced by the stress of recent events, had picked up emotional resonances in the recorded messages from the bombers. They weren't filled with the righteous fury of true believers. They were cold, calculating, professional mercenaries, he told his Velari handlers. The humans who planted those bombs weren't doing it for ideology. They were doing it for money. The revelation sent shockwaves through both governments. If the bombings were false flag operations, then someone with significant resources was actively working to sabotage the peace process. But who? And why? The answer lay in the economic data that few people bothered to analyze. The war had been incredibly profitable for certain interests: weapons manufacturers, military contractors, and the shipping companies that supplied both sides. Peace meant reduced profits, smaller contracts, and obsolete technologies. As the investigation deepened, a pattern emerged. The same financial networks that had profited from the war were now funding extremist groups on both sides. They were playing both ends against the middle, ensuring that conflict would continue regardless of which side won. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the power of the moment between Rain and Zephyr. The image of the human veteran and the Velari child had captured imaginations across the galaxy, inspiring others to look beyond the rhetoric of hatred and fear. The storm was indeed breaking, but it wasn't the one the conspirators had expected. Instead of tearing the galaxy apart, It was beginning to wash away the lies and manipulations that had kept the wounds of war from healing. Asterisk. 6 months after the Unity trials, the galaxy was a different place. The investigation into the false flag bombings had exposed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of both governments. Military contractors, radical politicians, and war profiteers found themselves facing justice for the first time in decades. The peace treaty, rather than being destroyed by the controversy, had been strengthened by the shared outrage over the deception. Rain stood on the observation deck of the New Horizon, a joint human-Villari research vessel exploring the galaxies. Frontier regions. The ship itself was a symbol of the changing times. Its crew was integrated, its mission peaceful, and its very existence proof that former enemies could work together toward common goals. "Commander," a voice said behind him. He turned to see Zephyr approaching, no longer the frightened child from the arena. 6 months of shared adventure had transformed him into a confident young ambassador, bridging the gap between species with a natural grace that made seasoned diplomats envious. "Just Elias, remember? I'm retired." "You're never really retired," Zephyr said with a smile that would have been impossible during the war. "You're just fighting different battles now." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel past. The ship was bound for the neutral zone, a region of space that had been devastated by the war, but was now being restored through joint efforts. It was slow work, but it was healing work. "Do you ever regret it?" Zephyr asked. "That moment in the arena? Everything that came after?" Rain considered the question carefully. The past 6 months had been turbulent. He'd faced congressional hearings, death threats, and enough media scrutiny to drive a lesser man to hiding. But he'd also seen former enemies working together, children from both species playing in integrated schools, and veterans from both sides finding common ground in their shared experiences. "No," he said finally, "I regret the war. I regret the years we wasted hating each other. But I don't regret reaching out to you that day, even though it nearly started another war. Especially because it nearly started another war. The people who wanted to use us against each other had to show their true faces. That's the only way we could defeat them." Zephyr nodded thoughtfully. His empathic abilities had grown stronger over the months, allowing him to sense the emotional undercurrents of entire populations. What he felt now was different from the fear and hatred that had dominated the galaxy for so long. There was still pain, still distrust, but there was also hope. "The captain wants to see us," he said. "They've received a message from the Andorian sector. Another species wants to join the peace talks." "The Andorians? I thought they were isolationists." "They were, but they saw the footage from the Unity trials. They want to know if the peace is real or if it's just another form of politics." They made their way to the bridge, where Captain Sarah Chun, a human veteran of the war, worked alongside her Villari first officer, Commander Yix. The sight of them collaborating so naturally would have been impossible to imagine just a year earlier. "The Andorian delegation is requesting safe passage to the peace conference," Chun reported. "They're also asking for something unusual. They want to meet with you specifically." "Us?" Rain asked. "They said they need to see for themselves if the legend of the arena is real. Apparently, your story has spread far beyond our two species." Zephyr felt a flutter of his old nervousness. The attention was still overwhelming sometimes, but he'd learned to channel it into something productive. "What do we tell them?" "The truth," Rain said simply. "That peace isn't about grand gestures or political treaties. It's about individuals choosing to see past their differences to find common ground." As the New Horizon changed course toward the Andorian sector, its crew prepared for another historic first contact. The galaxy was slowly learning what Rain and Zephyr had discovered in that moment of connection. that the things that united sentient beings are stronger than the things that divided them. The war was over, but the peace was just beginning. And at its heart stood an unlikely partnership between a scarred veteran and a brave young ambassador, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal when touched by understanding. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Unity trials as the turning point that transformed the galaxy from a collection of suspicious, warring factions into a genuine community of worlds. But for those who lived through it, the real transformation was simpler and more profound. It was the moment when former enemies chose to see each other, not as threats to be defeated, but as fellow travelers in the vast adventure of existence. The crowd had gone silent when Rain approached Zephyr that day. But when they spoke again, it was with a new voice, one that spoke of hope, understanding, and the infinite possibility of peace. Asterisk.